So welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Susanne Chishti, and Susanne is very welcome to the podcast. There's an awful lot going on in Susanne's world, and let's begin by asking Susanne maybe to tell us a little bit about who she is, her role as a CEO, everything she's involved in. She sits on many boards, and maybe tell us a little bit about your journey, Susanne. So over to you.
Thank you, Simon, and thanks for inviting me to join your podcast. So I am, as you said, I'm the CEO of FINTECH Circle. And as FINTECH Circle CEO, what my focus is to determine our strategy overall, to set our agenda. And we focus on a couple of things. One is investing. So we invest in FinTech startups in our angel network. So we're an early stage angel investment group. The second part is education. So we have published 7 books already, talking about various fintech topics. And we also use education via videos. So we also work with ITN, ITN's business channel, where we share fintech know-how. That's our third fintech film came out just in December, which was about fintech for good. So how can fintech help society overall, which is a key topic as well. And then, as you said, I'm also on the board of a bank in the UK. I'm on the board of a FTSE 250 company, a listed company in the UK. And so my role is, as a board member, is about governance of those companies, again, helping with strategy and also helping to connect the fintech sector to established players. There's also one thing I do, because lots of fintech startups want to work, with established companies. So that's where I can help and contribute. And originally I'm Austrian, we just spoke before we started, going to Vienna tonight. So I'm from Vienna originally, and I came to the UK more than 25 years ago. And now my family and I, we live in London, and live and work here, and just go to Austria for skiing holidays and for bowls like today.
Well, I'm very jealous, because the idea of jetting off to Vienna for a ball sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So I'm very jealous. But listen, thanks for sharing a little bit about who you are with our audience. And I just want to maybe touch on a couple of points that you've mentioned. First of all, let's talk about the publishing. So you've had some really bestsellers, some really great stuff. I mean, the FINTECH books, you've got the InsurTECH books, you've had many publications that you've published, and a lot goes into that. I mean, what have you learned from that experience? Because I know it's not easy, and you've got some great titles that you've published.
Yeah, I think the first thing is very much in the planning phase. When you plan a new book, a new publication, you have to think about, very simple things, but which really matter, like the title, the subtitle, the executive summary. What should it be all about? What's the audience? What's the purpose? Why should this book exist? So to be very clear on those things. And then once that's clear, is to determine the table of content, the strategy or the structure of your work. And that's what we always did with a group of editors. So which shows, FINTECH Circle has got more than 250,000, people in our community now. So we have grown significantly over the last few years. And our goal was, when we published our books, not to have it written by one person, because we said one person can never ever understand, our complicated fintech world. And neither the sub-verticals, which are, like you said, InsurTECH, WealthTECH, PAYTECH, LEGALTECH. So it's important to have a group of people come together. And what we did with our books, we crowdsourced them from the best brains globally. So these are the best entrepreneurs, the best investors, the best people in financial services who are very innovative and who have something to share based on what they're working on, what they're researching. And so when we publish a book, we went out to a global community and shared the outline with our previous books and said, that's the structure. And now you can apply to be part of one chapter. And by submitting like a 1-page abstract, what you want to write about. And then we had, all these applications coming in worldwide. And then our editing team, we reviewed them all, and then we chose who the best contributors were. And the goal, the purpose was really to give our readers an easy digestible volume of know-how and knowledge which you would not get anywhere else, and which would help makes it enjoyable to learn as well. Because often, like theoretic books are harder to read, and harder to learn, because you want to often to learn from practical people, who are in the industry. And so our books try to do that, try to get the best people together, sharing their information in piece-sized chunks, per articles, but then having a whole structure around it so that it all sticks together. It all has got one common theme, which are these fintech verticals. And then, of course, they're all published by WILEY. Then we did huge publishing events at the Shard, for example, in London, which were lots of fun, and where we had all our authors coming in, flying in from Latin America, from Asia, from Europe, from the States, and we had them coming in to celebrate the launch of our books, sign them all together, and then launch them. So the whole journey was fun, Simon. So it was really enjoyable, and hopefully the readers who read the books now will enjoy them too.
Well, look, you've got the readers, the worldwide international audience. You've got a number of subject books out there now, which are very well received. WILEY is a very well regarded, established publisher, very well respected internationally. And you mentioned, like, you've got your own community, which is like 250,000 people and growing. So congratulations on all that. And it's great to hear about the collaborative approach that you take to that. You mentioned also a little bit about TV, and you're talking about ITN and maybe CNBC. And what about the world of media and TV? Like that plays a part in what you do now, doesn't it?
It does, yes. And it's because, like, people want to consume information in many different ways. And more, people when I look at my teenage daughters, they like to go on YouTube and watch YouTube videos, even to study for their A-levels now, So I think people use more and more video content. And so that's the reason why we said, and started to work with ITN, who are experts in telling a story. And you need to have, it's a different expertise, either writing or video is again, different skill sets. And you need to get to the essence, to know what does the company stand for. And we try to portray that, highlighting the best fintech companies under a certain umbrella term. So our latest film is called Fintech for Good, where we said we want to learn about the best fintech companies who are innovating in the space and who make it easier for our society. So one example, is an InsurTECH company, Simon, which basically helps to allow in payments, across the whole InsurTech sector, and also allows people, if you're flooded, let's assume your house gets flooded, and you've got an insurance in place. Normally you would have to claim, to complete the claim form. It would take a few weeks before it gets approved. Then maybe another few weeks before you get the money into your bank account. But if your house is flooded and your carpet and your furniture is wet, you've probably other things on your mind than completing a claim form. And so now there's, one InsurTech company out there who does it in a way of putting a sensor, on your house. And if they know that the area gets flooded and the sensor gets wet, so the water reaches a certain level, you get the money paid out within half an hour into your account. And those types of innovations make a huge difference in people's lives. And that's, I think, very exciting, for our fintech sector, that we can do that. And when I think about, our cost of living crisis, where people, have got not enough to even survive, have to choose between eat or heat, I think that's where fintech has to step up, and help people to survive in a better form, and save more, cut their costs down. And I think fintech can do that, because we're all full of innovation and full of innovating entrepreneurs who want to challenge the status quo. And I think it's more needed than ever nowadays.
100%, I couldn't agree more. And you've, with all the different publications, whether it's InsurTech or WealthTECH or FinTech, and all the different publications that you had, there's literally a wealth of knowledge there for people to understand and to experience. And when you talk about sort of the new ways where people are making money, I mean, fintech in itself as a sector has sort of exploded. It grew substantially. And I suppose we can't go any further in the discussion without the word blockchain being mentioned. And I know you sit on an advisory board for that. You also sit, you mentioned earlier, I know you're the chairperson of other boards. You sit on as non-executive directors with other financial companies. You sit on the board of a bank in the UK. So you've got a great viewpoint of the whole landscape from many different, from startup to institutional investing. But when it comes to the blockchain, what are your views on where we're at now? Because we've been through a bit of turmoil, haven't we, with not necessarily blockchain, but things like NFTs and crypto and the markets, and there's a lot of turmoil at the time of us recording, but fundamental blockchain technology is a little bit different. So could you maybe share a little bit about your thinking on that in terms of where we are and where you think we're going?
Yeah, a very good question, Simon. I mean, I think that the whole blockchain technology and the almost Web 3.0 movement, will lead to a financial world which coexists. It's almost like the new world will coexist with the existing world. And with that, I mean that everything will have a digital twin. When you think about a property, there will be a digital twin of the property. And we call this also digital assets. Or if there's, shares, we will have digital copy of those shares. And so that's why, boards globally, I mean, every single bank board in the world probably decides and discusses at the moment how to deal with digital assets, and how to integrate or work with this new emerging sector, because it's here to stay, number one. And so the key thing for people in financial services in established, organization is to learn about it and to see how they can embrace it. And I would say, so that's the first thing to say, so it's not like a fad which goes away and people can forget about it. I think it's definitely something which will change our world, and it will coexist. And the most successful companies will be those, I think, who learn to embrace, the whole world of an even metaverse. When you think about the metaverse even a step further, but learn how these new concepts, these new business models, new technologies work, number one, how they can use them, for their own benefit in their own organizations. And then they need to learn how to work with people in this sector, because often when I talk to blockchain developers, and people who are very deep into the technology, often their ways of working are different. Their ways of thinking, of designing products is different. And so often you've got a clash between the old and the new world. And so you need to learn to be hybrid, that you can operate in the existing world, talking to some people, but you also can work in the new world, and I think over time it will merge. It will be one big new, and I always say, fintech is the future of finance. So in 10 years' time, there will not be any bank without fintech, and probably no bank without blockchain technologies underneath. And this will be used both for settling. It will be used by central banks. Lots of central banks nowadays are using so-called CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. And they test them both on the wholesale side, bank to bank, on the retail side, bank to consumer. And that's done globally. And we've got some central banks, including China or Singapore, they're very much ahead of the game. They're moving further, fastest. We've got other central banks who are still kind of exploring the options, the theoretic options. But everybody, is thinking, is investigating, is researching it. And so that's, I think, very exciting. It's a very exciting space for us. And something which we all will be taught in business schools and universities. I mean, most universities now, when you study finance, I often get invited to speak as well at universities because of this reason, that students nowadays need to learn about this new future of finance to make sure that their careers, are future-proof and are relevant, when they enter the workforce.
Yeah, there's some great insights in that and interesting observations in terms of the bank infrastructure behind the scenes, the blockchain, the ledgers, the decentralization of that, the currencies that they're already involved in, bank to bank, bank to consumer. I think it's a fascinating subject. And we're also seeing, aren't we, new ways of micropayments, new ways of helping different communities around the world are coming from this, not so much new anymore, but this alternative way of providing, I suppose, financial technologies. So yeah, it's a fascinating space, and that you do have a very nice position because you've got lots of different inputs coming into you. And I know you're an expert in this area, so it's great to be able to talk to you about this. What do you think are some of the challenges, though, just as a last question on this particular part of our discussion today? When you look at the challenges that we're facing, whether that's from a company, a startup, an angel investment perspective, or whether it's from the big global banks and institutions, when you look forward, what sort of challenges are on your radar?
I would say, from a macroeconomic point of view, it's a global recession. That's what we are heading towards. And so that's, I think, a challenge we're all facing. From a startup point of view, it's fundraising. Raising funds in these environments is very difficult because there's less capital available. It's harder to convince investors to invest. Those investors who do invest want to see more traction. Often it's not anymore enough to have revenues. Ideally, you want to be close to profitability, or have a path towards profitability, have good unit economics, in terms of product, data. So there is, for startups, raising funding, for scale-ups, raising follow-on rounds, it's harder. That's a challenge here. And I would say for people, individuals, it's about financial literacy. That's one challenge I think we face as a society, that lots of people, even people in financial service, often don't know how to invest their own money. They don't know how to save. They don't understand the impact of interest rates, of debt, how dangerous it is if you get in a debt spiral. And so I think from a society point of view, it's about understanding financial terms, to learn almost already at school, at university, what you need to know as an adult to manage your own finances well, so that you end up with a nice pension pot at some stage when you want to retire. And that's another big challenge for our society. We call this the pension time bomb. And we face that. We have got, I believe, in the UK alone, it's almost 40% of people, who are going to retire won't have enough money at retirement. And so that's so sad, because if you would have started when we started out our jobs at 25 and worked, after 40 years and saved for 40 years, we would have a much bigger retirement pot. But people don't think about pensions at 25. But ideally, you should start to do that. And so it's really about financial literacy. I think that's the biggest challenge for our society, so that the people feel safe, and don't have to worry. And this again goes into the whole discussion about well-being. Mental well-being is often linked to financial well-being naturally. Then also another key topic, Simon. Yeah.
And just to ask you a little bit further on that, because my mind, as you were talking there, I was thinking about the advancements of AI, the advancements of robotics, the future of work, social payments, people receiving a sort of a minimum level of income. And that's, down the road a little bit somewhere, although some countries and governments are running some experiments with that now. But that the financial transparency and the financial education, just from my perspective, looking outside in, there seems to be a huge gap between what we're still teaching people and the level of information that's available to people, and also the tools. There's, whether if you're talking blockchain or you're talking very advanced fintech, you need a certain level of technical understanding to sort of be involved in this new world. And I know some of the tools are getting better and the consumer-facing interfaces are getting a little bit better. But when it comes to the education, there seems to be a lot still to do here.
Yes, I agree totally. And I think I think it almost should start out, at school, where all children learn money skills, how to deal with money, and learn those skills at school, and discuss it, at home, and kind of learn it, so that when they get the first paycheck, they know what to do with it. They know how to save. And especially now where our interest rates go up, which is really important, because for the first time since probably 30 years now, we've got inflation, which is on one side, it's a bad thing because it's high inflation, makes our money worth less. But equally, on the other hand, we've got interest again being paid on accounts, which we never had over the last, 10, 15 years. And so now it makes sense to start saving again because you get paid, and so we've got like Atom Bank or Zoppa, fintech companies, and you can open accounts online and you get immediately 2.5% interest, for daily liquid savings. And this didn't exist half a year ago, so we are seeing that happening now because of inflation. And that's why it's important. Yes, you're totally right, for people to learn how to deal with their money, and how to make sure it lasts and that it grows for their own happiness.
Yeah, and we've come through a period of time where interest rates have been historically low for a long, long, long time.
Yes.
And we have seen obviously a lifting of those interest rates now, which impacts inflation. It tries to curb inflation to some degree. We've seen the Fed, haven't we, raising interest rates, some would say maybe too much. There was a slight easing at the time of recording this where it started to ease up. We saw a little lift in the market, but it's been down predominantly even for the large sort of tech stocks around the world, right, for lots of reasons, layoffs and everything, and recessionary concerns, war, etc. But there's a direct connection, isn't there, as well, because you mentioned the fundraising element. When businesses are looking to raise money, it has been quite a challenging environment over the last sort of 12 months or so. And the future of fundraising, a lot of companies are starting to struggle now, aren't they? Because they're running out of runway, they're running out of cash, and the liquidity or the willingness of investors to put more in. It's not the same landscape it was even 12 months ago. It's changed dramatically, hasn't it?
It has, Simon. It's, I think, much harder now. It is much more of a challenge because you have to make sure that your money lasts longer. But equally, everything gets more expensive. Employees want more pay because inflation has gone up. Your suppliers might charge you more, so your cost base goes up. But you might not be able to pass it on to your clients. Because unless they might not accept it. So you might be squeezed in the middle, and then you might need even more funding, but you can't get it, So you have to plan so well ahead because you've got all these variables around you. And what we've seen is investors, the investors help their portfolio companies first because they want to make sure that the existing portfolio companies survive. So invest in them, help them with follow-on rounds. But for a new company, a new startup launching now, it's a harder sell, and it's still possible, it's still possible, but it requires more time probably, and a better story, a more convincing company. So the best companies will raise funding, and the ones who are not as good yet, they just have to get good first, maybe to be able to raise funding and bootstrap for longer, realistically bootstrap for longer. And so that's, I think, yes, the environment we're in. But at the same time, I always say, if you launch a startup, at the time, which is hardest, which might be now, you have gone through the most difficult phase at the beginning, and then it will become easier because then then everything improves. Then you have had the toughest learning lessons at the beginning of your career as entrepreneur, and then you can just fly. It's better almost this way than if you learned to launch your business in a time where lots of money was available. You didn't learn how to budget. And then this time comes now, and then you're getting completely surprised, and run out of money. So it's always, you have to look at the bright side. So there are positives in there when you want launches now. And of course, you might be able to hire more people because we've seen there are very redundancies at Twitter, at some large tech companies, and those, high quality people are available to be hired now by startups. So it might also have a positive impact on the HR front.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that insight. And yeah, I think you're right. I'm often reminded that there's a lot of great companies have been founded and developed in very tough times. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm often reminded of that. But look, thanks for sharing that. I wanted to maybe change gear a little bit and ask you a few questions. You've shared a lot of information and knowledge there about the sector that you're involved in. But when you take on board information yourself, do you like to read books? Do you listen to audio books? Do you find yourself just searching the web for information? And what type of things do you like to read? Do you like to read for pleasure? Do you just read for business? Is it biographies? Where are you at with that sort of onboarding of your own media and information?
Yes, I think I do all of those things you said, so I like reading books. I like reading online, I like watching videos on certain topics. I sometimes do podcasts as well. So it's kind of a combination of all of those things. And sometimes I'm, like I remember when I was once flying to a conference, on digital assets, then I go deep into a topic, so then I look, what can I find on this topic across all media? And then try to digest it all and to get me up to speed to the latest, what's just happening in the industry. And so I think it's useful nowadays that we've got everything available, specifically for people, who maybe are dyslexic, or also have got other, neurodiversity needs. Nowadays, it's the best time almost, because you can choose, whatever you learn easiest, use this type of medium to get education and learn about new topics one is interested in. Yeah.
It's a great point, because some people can't read a book. They just don't read books. Other people, voracious readers, love reading books. Some people, they like listening to stuff so they can do something else at the same time. For other people, they learn most when they watch something, so you're right. That sort of multimedia approach is really helpful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then when you think about your career to date, now this could be going back to your childhood, by the way, it doesn't have to be your sort of, your most recent year, but there must have been people along your journey that have sort of stick out as people that have either inspired you or people that you admire. When I sort of ask you that question, who springs to mind?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, because I think there are many people, Simon, many people who inspired me along my journey. I mean, starting from teachers at school, my mother, for example, or grandmother, but then equally friends, inspired me, board members, colleagues at boards whom I learned from, investors I've been working with, so I think there's a whole range of great people, or former bosses, when I remember, when I think back to my time at Morgan Stanley or Deutsche Bank or Lloyd's, then I had a great bosses there as well, and at Accenture. So I would say there's too many to name, Simon, too many to name, but very importantly, to learn from other people. That's what I would conclude, because I always, and I continue to learn every day. I think that's the nice thing about life, that you never stop learning, and that you learn in different situations. When you're in a board meeting, you learn in a different way than when you are at university, or when you are working on a deal. There are again different things, new things to learn. So many people inspired me, many people, including yourself, running the podcast today. That's, you're doing fantastically. I couldn't do that. So
Oh, you're very kind, but I know you've worked with some exceptional people, and yeah, there's probably way too many to mention. But thanks for sharing that, because whether it was a school teacher or somebody you work with in the investment career, in the banks and the investment companies that you've worked at, or whether it's sort of in today's world on the boards that you sit in, that you can take inspiration at each step of that journey, can't you? But what about advice then, just to maybe expand that question a little bit? There must be advice that you've received from people along the way that has stuck with you, that resonates with you, that you feel, do you know what, I really appreciated learning that, because that, I wish I'd have known that sooner. Or is there some advice that you often find yourself sharing with people that you think is really important for our audience to hear about?
Yeah, I would say one great advice I got at school through a guest speaker. And this guest speaker, I think he was a gentleman from Switzerland, like a senior manager, and he came to our school and he spoke. And he said there are 3 things you have to do in life to have a happy life, And he said the first thing, you have to think positively. Number 2, you have to speak positively. Number 3, you have to act positively, and I think that's something which I try to do in my life, because I think when you start out thinking in positive ways and thinking always looking at the bright side, I mean, like an optimist in general, but looking at the bright side of our world, what can we do better, improve, then it's about speaking positively. I'm not a person who is negative, I don't speak, I'm always speaking positively, because that's the way I think. Then it's about acting, helping others, trying to add value, and bring people together. That's why we are called FINTECH Circle, because we're bringing the fintech stakeholders together, and that's close to my heart. So I enjoy doing that. And so then you feel your life is positive, because you've done all of that. So that was very good advice I got early on. Another advice I got later, which was, if you're looking for one person in your life, or if you're looking for one person, to change your life, look at the mirror. It's you. If there's something you don't like about life, or you don't like about your job, or you don't like about your private life, you have to change it. Nobody else will do it for you. So I think that's a call to action, that maybe beginning of the year as well, New Year's resolution, Simon. But I think if we find we don't like things in our life, it's time to change it. We have to do that ourselves. And I guess the third philosophy in my life is I've got a so-called no jerks policy, I call it, and I mean that across my whole life, if I find people who are unethical or who have no integrity, I just don't want to work with them. I don't want to have them in my circle. And so it's important to choose, whom you let into your life, I think, because your energy is valuable, your time is valuable. And so that's why I think the people you should engage with should be supportive, and it should be happy people to work with, in your own life. So I guess it's the other philosophy I follow.
Well, I couldn't agree more on the no jerks policy. I think life is too short. So that's 100%. And I love the, looking in the mirror, because ultimately it's your life, right? Ultimately, sometimes we forget that. We get so busy, we forget that we can change things, and I love that. So the simplicity of that and the brilliance of that is very good. But also the advice, with that person that came to, earlier on and said, look, you've got to not just think positively, but you need to talk positively and you need to act positively. And it's interesting how things like that stay with us, don't they? And it's quite obvious, I'm sure, to people watching and listening to this episode, there's an energy, there's an enthusiasm, there's an optimism, and that comes across, that resonates, doesn't it? Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. I really enjoyed that. And I suppose a couple of last things just before we wrap up, because I know you mentioned there we're all busy and I don't want to get in the way of you jetting off to this ball in Vienna. Okay, so I just want to squeeze two more things in if I can. As you look ahead, the next 6 months, the next 12 months, because you've got a lot going on, Susanne, what are you focused on? What's taking up your mental capacity? What are you thinking about? What are you hoping to achieve over the next sort of 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. I would say, focusing on key themes within our industry. One of them is green finance, green fintech. So all to do with ESG, environment, social governance. Here we see lots of interesting trends, and I want to go and work with those ESG companies, make sure that we help them get funded, we help them work with established players in the industry, because even all banks looking for ESG solutions either, so there's a huge demand for ESG based, we call them green fintechs, green finance startups. So that's one area. The other area is diversity. So diversity is key. And when I think, we talked about the pension time bomb before, and unfortunately there are statistics out there which show that women have got even less savings than men do, so there's a huge diversity gap in terms of saving, access to money, and lots of disadvantaged situations still exist, and so that's one area for me. Definitely is diversity, where I want to help as much as I can other women, in their careers, and help women in general, to inspire them, to start thinking about their own finances and never to give up their own bank account. It's so important. Everybody needs their own bank account. And I would say thirdly, it's about financial inclusion. It's about really financial inclusion, because we have got 2 billion people globally who have got no bank accounts, literally. And we have got, even in developed countries, we have got large chunks of our population who live in poverty. In the UK, we've got 4 million people with no bank accounts. In the US, we've got 40% of people who have got less than $400 in savings. So if one thing breaks, if the fridge breaks, or the dishwasher, they are in debt. So you've got this huge issue, and that's why financial inclusion is a key topic of ours as well at FINTECH Circle, but we will also spend more time on this year. So I would say these areas, diversity, green finance, and financial inclusion, these are key.
Yeah, thank you, Susanne. I mean, all big topics. I mean, financial inclusion, the financial education elements to that, whether they're developed or developing countries, the amount of lack of financial stability or regulation. Some of the stats that you've thrown out there in terms of the UK market without bank accounts is staggering. And I'd heard the US stat before in terms of, it's how much money do people have? How long can they go without having to take an income again? It's not much for most people, and that financial literacy, that financial understanding would certainly help in lots of areas. And you've touched on neurodiversity a few times, and also the big push into diversity, to make sure that people have that kind of financial independence, or at least understand how to begin that journey, I think is critical. And of course, ESG and DEI are big topics, sustainability, huge topic. So it sounds like on top of everything that you're doing, you've got a huge year ahead. So thanks for
ahead, Simon. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I suppose the last thing before we wrap up is there anything else that you're working on, that you focused on, that I haven't touched on, that you'd like to share with our worldwide audience? And also, as part of that, if people want to reach out to you, the FinTech Circle, or to get closer to the kind of things that you're working on and that you're putting out, where are you sending people to? Are you sending them to your website, to LinkedIn? Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Yes. I would say, in terms of FinTech Circle, if you want to watch our films, come to fintechcircle.com, to our website, where we've got all our films, our 3 films online. If you would like to read, one of our 7 books, including the latest book, which is FinTech for Dummies, you can get them on Amazon. You can buy them at any good bookstore. And then, of course, if you want to be kept up to date, about the latest fintech developments, you can follow FinTech Circle on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, we've got also a large group of more than 40,000 people where you can join, and then you can share your own work there as well. So it's not just a one-way communication, but it's two-way communication in this LinkedIn group. So you can join us across all social media channels, also on YouTube. You can also join us on YouTube and watch films there. And also personally, it's FinTech Circle, but also myself, Susanne Chishti. If you look on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and Instagram, you can also find my personal account, where I also share more of what I'm up to, in the fintech sector. So that's the best way to keep in touch.
Well, that's great. Listen, I think that brings us nicely to the end of today's discussion, Susanne. So listen, thanks very much to Susanne for joining us here on the Global Discussion. It's been a pleasure. And thanks to everybody who's been watching or listening to this episode. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe. Please do all the things that we need you to do to help support the podcast. And I hope that you join us back here again for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. So all that's left for me to say is thank you to Susanne. Thanks so much. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you again today.
Thank you, Simon. Lovely to speak to you again today.